that has been very close to my heart in as much as I have run away from it all my life. Um, it is about normalizing grief and bereavement. And as they say in every spiritual tradition, each one of us has had that experience and is most likely to have that experience in one form or the other. However, grief and bereavement seem to have become taboos and seem to have become things that we don't necessarily speak about. So we are here today, and I'm grateful for all of you who have made the time to be here today to participate in this conversation about why is it important to normalize something like grief and bereavement. What is it, and what is it that might hold us back, and what can we do about it, especially as caregivers. One of the things that I have often said in all my interactions with caregivers or myself sometimes is that we live in a world where moving on is overrated and grieving is underrated. And what might be the balance between the two? Because you need to do a little of both. And before the session, Smriti, who is the speaker for the session today, and I were discussing what would we really wish for this evening to be. And we felt that today the best tribute to the topic would be if we can have a conversation about grief and bereavement. If it was really a conversation between friends, that we could share our perspective, our stories, and it could be a conversation over tea. Frankly, that is the goal of this webinar. And I hope that you will join us in this conversation over a cup of tea to talk about a subject that might feel difficult, but so long as we are together, we will get through it. With that, I would like to take a little time to introduce to you Caregiver Saathi as an organization. Many of you, and I see many familiar faces, so I find that this might be a little bit of a repeat for you, but I hope that this repeat will only deepen your conviction in our organization and help us spread the word. So Caregiver Saathi is attempting to create an ecosystem of well-being and healing for primary caregivers. Family caregivers of those navigating terminal illness, chronic, or any other life-limiting conditions have their very unique challenges. And we would like to support them through their caregiving journeys and even beyond. So we wish to create an environment of well-being by empowering the caregiver, and we believe that both the caregiver and the care receiver or the patient can lead full lives during illness and beyond. So how do we do this? We use technology-enabled systems for human connection, however ironic or dichotomous that seems, but it seems to be something that this pandemic has brought upon us. We have awareness programs like this one, which are both online and offline, these days more online than offline. We have a helpline. We have something called healing circles or support group meetings. We have communication or information through social media. We provide information to caregivers, people who are experienced caregivers, and those who may be caregivers in the future as well, regarding caregiving and everything that might be related to it. Finally, We have a platform that can enable support for caregivers, including an app which is designed to help caregivers organize themselves so that they can create time and space for self-care and perhaps things like attending such meetings. So what are the resources that we have built for you so far? The resources that we have for you are a tech-enabled platform or support. Visit our website and the app. We provide training both online and offline. We have an app for caregivers. We have a community that is run both on Facebook, WhatsApp, and the pre-pandemic era, we used to meet as well. We do 2 series of videos through which we publish on our website as well as social media. So there's one that's called Gentle Warriors, which is our way of honoring caregivers and encouraging them to tell their stories. Telling your story is healing, not just for the storyteller, but also for the listener. So if you know people who would like to tell their story or who could tell their story, then do encourage them. Compassionate Caring is a series of videos and webinars by experts who can help caregivers understand various aspects of caregiving so that the caring that they offer is compassionate both to the patient as well as themselves. We provide caregiver coaching, that is one-on-one coaching to caregivers, and family counseling, and finally, a volunteer-based respite care program. So how can you get involved? You can get involved by joining the healing circles or support groups as well-wishers of caregivers or as caregivers. You can participate in the caregiving stories. You can help us spread the word in person and on social media. You can volunteer with us. You can help donate or raise funds. We have a very intense internship program, and as of today, we've had 30 interns, and we hope that many more youngsters will join our internship program, because it is only essential that subjects like care, caregiving is integrated in the education programs. You could also give us referrals to partners, hospitals, and other organizations that we can collaborate with in working together or in spreading the word or in making ourselves better. There's a framework that we use, and this framework is something that I will briefly touch upon right now. The framework is that we use various tools, which include 7 elements of well-being and building resilience for caregivers. These 7 elements of well-being are physiological, financial and legal, psychological, spiritual, social, life and work purpose, and creative expression. We believe that stress is caused by an imbalance in the well-being, and unaddressed chronic stress leads to mental health issues. So building resilience through practices of mind, body, and soul can enable and empower caregivers to be able to endure the challenging caregiving journey. With that said, this webinar is a part of the psychological well-being, and it is my immense pleasure to introduce an expert in the field as well as a very dear friend, somebody that I've had multiple conversations with, and I look forward to this conversation this evening as well, Smriti Rana. So Smriti Rana is the Director of Programs at Pallium India, Trivandrum. She is trained in integrative and holistic psychological counseling. She began her work in palliative care after losing several family members in 1 year. to protracted illness that was unfortunately marked by the conspicuous absence of pain relief. She provides supportive consultations to families and individuals experiencing illness related suffering while advocating for better awareness about access to palliative care. I know that she's extremely passionate about the subject and making a shift, or I think creating a dent in the universe, really. Um, she currently heads the national outreach program that facilitates partnerships with individuals and organizations to catalyze the development and integration of effective pain relief and quality palliative care services with healthcare across India. Pallium India is now present in 21 states and union territories, which is, I think, incredible work. Smriti represents Pallium India in working closely with the WHO SEARO to scale up palliative care services in the region by providing technical and knowledge-based expertise where required or requested. She manages the non-clinical activities at Trivandrum Institute of Palliative Sciences, fondly called TIPS, which in 2012 became a WHO collaborating center for training and policy on access to pain relief. She has been a guest faculty for 2 years at Dartmouth University Healthcare Foundations. She has special interest in advanced care planning, end-of-life care. Some of you may have attended our webinar on end-of-life care, caregiver advocacy, addiction issues, global dynamics and policies in accessing essential medicines and palliative care in humanitarian aid settings. I am so delighted that Smriti could make the time for this webinar and share with her your perspective, a perspective on grief, both from her personal experience as well as her immense expertise. I'd like to make some admin announcement that we will spend the next 40 minutes having a discussion or presentation regarding the topic for the day and its implications for compassionate caring and caregivers. Broadly, there will be 3 parts to the session. Part 1 is the presentation or the conversation that Smriti will be having. During this part, we'll request the participants to listen and share your thoughts and questions on the chat box. We will incorporate the questions as far as possible during the discussion. We will have a following Q&A section in which participants can ask questions by using the feature of raise your hand or type their questions in the chat box. Finally, and most importantly, we would love your feedback and suggestions for what we could do better or differently. So keep your microphones muted at all times to minimize background sounds. We will call out for you to be, when you want to share, to be unmuted. If you are seated and your camera is stable, then please keep it on, else we request you to turn it off. Sometimes some of us have a gallery view and that can be distracting. We keep the group restricted to registered participants, and this session is not being live streamed on any platform. So you're welcome to ask any question that you may feel will be valuable for you. We are recording this webinar, and some sections of the panel discussion or the conversation will be used for sharing later. However, any personal questions that you ask will not be shared or disclosed publicly. We will refer to this discussion for designing further programs. And with that, over to you, Smriti.
Thank you, Bhavana. Very, very generous introduction. I can see in the audience several friends and who I've interacted with several times. So nice to see them, and of course some mentors who. So I'm also happy but nervous are in the audience. Just a quick I think a non-professional sort of introduction would be that I got into palliative care, as Bhavana read out, because our family suffered several losses in 1 year, and I was 16 and a half when the illnesses sort of came one after the other, including my mum. And by the year 2000, when I was 18, 6 people in my family had passed away after 2 years of very, very brutal illness. And then, of course, there were a few shorter illnesses. There was a lot of stress. And so really at the cusp of becoming an adult was this extremely, um, well, I can call it a powerful experience now. At the time, it was a devastating experience. And it really shook my world in every possible way. But uh, I read a quote recently, I think today, where someone said, "It broke my heart, but um, it cleared my vision." So I think for me, that's when my vision for palliative care, for my role in palliative care, became clear. I trained as a psychologist with the explicit intention of working with families going through grief and illness. Of course, life has other plans for you, so I'm doing a lot of other stuff now. And I'm very, very honored and privileged that I'm part of the Pallium India family. And through Pallium India, I've encountered Caregiver Saathi, Bhavana, and a whole bunch of people who I now have not just a lot of respect for, but also a lot of love for. So thank you, Bhavna, for having me here. Um, I, I wanted to avoid using slides simply because I thought this should be more of a conversation. But then I also realized that, uh, as was pointed out, a lot of people are visual learners. So sometimes I also tend to be abstract. So I've kept some of the slides, and we won't spend too much time on them. We'll just use them as cues to sort of facilitate our conversation. And I know some of you have already seen these slides before, so pardon the repetition. So I'm just going to start off
Just,
by.
yeah, just give me a second. Sorry, Smriti, I forgot this. We will launch a poll for us to understand who in the audience and what their relationship with caregiving is. And I'm going to request my colleague Anish to launch that poll asking what is the role that people in the audience relate with the most. And you can, in the meanwhile, bring up your slides.
Just one moment. I'm having a power issue. I'll just sort that out in a second.
Sure.
Okay, so the poll is active. We have about 80% of people who have responded already.
Thank you. All right.
Okay, so great. I can see the poll. And okay, all right. So this is makes up most of the audience. So is it okay if I share the screen now, Rana? We get started. Okay, so I know that at the moment grief is pretty front and center globally. Not just are people experiencing grief in unprecedented ways, but so many of us are experiencing it that it's really a collective phenomenon now more than an individual one. But even within that collective phenomenon, each of us have our stories, and each story is unique. But I'm just going to sort of, when we talk about normalizing grief and bereavement, um, it's from the point of view that, you know, it's okay to talk about it, because only once we talk about it can we address it in appropriate ways, can we reach out to one another and be there for each other. So that's the sort of premise that I'd like to set. And please forgive the didactic sort of slides. Like I said, they're just more like cues to get the conversation going. So very first and foremost, it's important to realize that grief and the rituals of mourning are healthy adaptations to loss. There is nothing unnatural about grief. It's one of the things that makes us human. And when we encounter a loss, whether it's of a relationship or whether it's of, you know, something that we have valued, a person, we tend to feel grief. So I'm just going to quickly ask you to type in your responses in the chat box, what some of those different kinds of losses may be, for not just a patient, but since so many, this is a forum where we're also focusing on caregivers. So what are some of the losses that you think caregivers might be going through? And I'm not talking about post-bereavement, I'm talking about the entire phenomenon. So if Bhavna, I can't see the chat box, so please feel free to call out any responses that are coming in. So like I said, there are several losses that I experienced. And for the patient, the losses could be a loss of autonomy and control. They've lost control over their lives. Autonomy is usually trampled over. Everybody suddenly starts telling the patient what he or she should be doing, how they should be looking after themselves, what medicine to have, what interventions to go in for. Loss of health is the most obvious thing. It could be a loss of mental function depending on the kind of illness that they have. Loss of physical function, again, dependent on the illness. And a very important thing is their social roles and responsibilities. Who are they in relation to their society, in relation to the world? What roles do they fulfill? What do they identify as? Dignity, especially in some of our settings, is one of the first casualties of an illness. And time, because so much of their time just goes into uh, focusing on their health, and of course the loss of a future if it is an advanced illness. But I would like to also highlight what caregivers and family members lose. And again, they lose control as well. They lose a functioning member. So whether it's a mom, whether it's a sibling, whether it's the wise old grandmother, or it could be a young child who gives them much joy, a functioning member is lost. A sense of normalcy. I mean, all of us, our lives have been upended when we've encountered a major illness or a major tragedy in our lives. Stability goes with that sense of normalcy. And of course, the family also loses time with each other, time that they can dedicate to other activities. Caregiving takes up, I'm sure all of you know who've been caregivers, that it becomes the most important thing in your life and everything else has to adapt around it. And you also lose a sense of, in fact, uh, I know who've lost out on career opportunities or even educational opportunities and things like that. So these are all losses, and every single one of these things that I have listed will elicit grief. So grief does not only mean that we feel something, we feel it when we lose somebody. All of these losses and more will elicit grief. Just before we go into the next bit, I'm going to ask all of you, and Bhavna, please help me out here. We say that grief is a complete human experience, right? So if I were to ask you, where in your bodies, in your physical bodies, do you experience grief? Where would you experience it? So think about it. Some people might feel it in their chests differently. Some people might feel it in their bellies, in their tummies. Some might feel it in the throat, yeah, a tightness in the throat, a heaviness in the chest, pain and ache in the shoulders, fuzziness in the head, upset tummies. So these are all manifestations of grief as well. So it's not
stiff
just
neck, right? Stiff neck, back.
And an interesting phenomenon I've observed, Bhavna, is people saying that, they feel choked up, right? And if you think of the language that we use to describe our grief, it may seem a little abstract and esoteric, but, the inability to communicate your grief to your loved one, the inability to share, like there's a lot of collusion when we come across illness. There's always this thing of how much should we talk to the patient about? Should we tell them how advanced it is? Should we address the issue of death? Should we address the issue of advanced care planning? Should we talk about the will? There are so many taboo subjects. And literally, sometimes it feels like you're choking up with all of this, this pent up communication. So, yeah, there are very interesting ways of looking at this experience. But when we say it's a total human experience, we feel it in different domains. So for example, emotionally, Grief can come out as aggression. It can come out as guilt, as sadness, right? We do feel angry sometimes. Grief also manifests as anger. Cognitively, people might have difficulties in concentrating. They might have difficulties in paying attention to things. They might be obsessively remembering certain, going back to certain memories. Yeah, so cognitively, all those things happen. Socially, people might withdraw from others. There might be conflict between people within families because styles of grieving are so different. The way I grieve might be very different from the way my brother grieves, right? And because we are not grieving in the same exact way, that might lead to some tension between us, right? Or it might be said that, hey, you're not grieving, you're not even crying,
Yeah.
right? I mean, a lot of us have gone through that sort of an experience also. There is the spiritual component, of course, which is, when I say spiritual, I don't mean only religious beliefs. I also mean a sense of meaning, a sense of connection, a sense of hope. So when we experience grief, it manifests spiritually in these dimensions. And physically, of course, like I've said, there are sleep disruptions, dysregulations of hormones, immune system is affected. There could be appetite disruptions, all of that. So it is such a complete and total experience. So it's not just about crying or, it's an emotional thing. It manifests in all these different domains. And there are different factors that actually influence grief. And I'm not going to get into this, it's a bit technical, but attachment styles, how we have attached ourselves to the people in our lives, especially our primary caregivers and our immediate family, to a large extent determines what the grief experience is going to look like, no matter which part of life that grief occurs in, right? So as children, there are different attachment styles that we develop, and I'm not going to go into the details, but a lot of it then determines the outcomes. Um, the way our families are structured, who are the subgroups within families. Sometimes we have allies within our own families. We have a little conflict groups in our own families. And there are, sometimes we have clear-cut boundaries. Sometimes we have no boundaries at all. Sometimes we're all enmeshed in each other. We don't know where someone else's emotions begin and end and where ours start. What is the flexibility within the family in expressing emotion, how a family receives the emotion you experience. All of these things will influence how grief is expressed or even experienced.
I'm sorry, just struck by the previous slide. Sorry, I'm interrupting you, but I was
No.
just like, it just came to the fore for me, which is that interestingly, socially, although grief is such a complex and a complete human experience, socially, what we hear more often is if there is a loss or if there is an event, people are more likely to say, so how are you holding up?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
and a response will be, I think just fine, just like, so and so was not so affected.
Yeah. There's a lot of judgment.
Yeah,
There's a lot of like evaluation of somebody's grief, right?
yes.
Yeah, yeah, there is a lot of that. And in fact, in the Q&A sessions that we're running also, that was a question. How obliged am I to show people that I'm grieving? That was the first question we addressed. And it's because we feel evaluated. And that's our relationship with society, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting observation. And coming back to what influences our grief, how we communicate within our family is a big one, I think, right? There are people within our families that we would never go and express ourselves to authentically, or we might fine tune our responses to fit in with their expectations. We take on roles because we're expected to take on roles. Who decides? Who is the decision maker? Who is the one who who is open and flexible to talk to? So all of these things determine how our grief is. And what if the person we've lost is the one we used to go and express our grief to? Then what happens, right? So I think that these are all factors that come into play. And finally, of course, social support is so important. If the family is isolated, and very closed, does not have very open boundaries with its ecosystem, then it's likely that whatever dysfunctional patterns there are will get emphasized. Whereas cohesive families engage with society, who don't mind asking for help, who rely on their communities to help them through a tough time, will probably fare a little bit better. So these are just different factors on different levels, at an individual level to a family level to a social level. Um,
I do think that when it comes to chronic and long term care, caregivers tend to be socially isolated by the sheer nature. So they may be a family of a certain type, but over a period of time, in have being just so consumed by caregiving, they may be socially isolated, and it just becomes harder and harder.
yeah.
That at the point of grief or bereavement, it just becomes even more isolation.
Especially in, I would say, in situations where it's been a long term caregiving
Yeah.
experience, right? Or if it's been an experience of caregiving which has been extremely difficult, where the patient has deteriorated steadily, but in very, very devastating ways.
Yes.
You know, people with dementia, people with ALS, things like that. It's, I mean, not to say one kind of caregiving is easier or harder, but
Mm,
uh, it's a very isolating experience because you're so busy looking after that, also shielding the patient from the rest of the world, that you
exactly.
yourself lose connection with the rest of the world. Yeah.
And
Like,
mental health support, right? So, for example, if you're looking after somebody with a mental health condition, caregiving can be enmeshed with shame, guilt, and therefore isolation. And therefore, then expression of grief becomes harder
yeah.
when there is that deterioration. And here I'd like to highlight, because one of the stakeholders that we are trying to reach out to are well-wishers of caregivers.
Yeah.
So if there are well-wishers of caregivers, and all of us might be well-wishers of caregivers in the audience, I would think that it's not just the responsibility of the caregiver to reach out at their point of grief, but for well-wishers to maintain contact irrespective of the response.
Mm. Yeah.
So, I mean, if I relate it to my experience when my dad was very unwell, I think our ability to express, our vulnerability with those who stayed in touch with us, whether or not we responded,
Yeah.
was, was better than extended family, which chose to distance themselves.
You're very right, Bhavna. And I mean, these are things that we don't often talk about. I
Yeah.
mean, typically when we talk about caregiving, we think of cancer, we think of certain illnesses and things like that. What about caregiving for somebody who has a substance use issue?
Yeah.
What about caring for somebody who, like you said, has a severe mental health issue?
Yeah.
So it, and also the stigmas that go with it, right? The
Yeah.
stigma itself is so isolating that
Yeah.
even if you ask for help, I mean, I know that families living with substance abuse, it's almost like, why don't you fix the problem, like as if it's a choice. Like, you guys are not doing enough, so therefore
Yeah.
why are you bringing this problem to us? Just put him in rehab, he'll be fine.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's a very difficult conversation to have. So yes, I'm very glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So shall I move forward? Are there any comments or anything in the chat box that you'd like to address?
I think it was brought up that the isolation is not just social but professional as well.
Oh yeah.
So I think it's a great point Jagruti is mentioning, that the isolation is not just from society and extended family. I think colleagues play a huge role as well-wishers. And sometimes colleagues can be so task focused and or output driven or role driven that they might miss the person overall, and can a caregiver can feel isolated in their professional spaces as well.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I know there's more conversation happening now about even being given time off from work and things like that. But it's a long way to go, because we're given time off from work perhaps in some settings, if it's a spouse or a parent, what happens if you lose like a best friend? You know, what happens if you lose like, yeah. So we talk about disenfranchised grief a little further down the line as well. Yeah.
I was just reminded of my days in HR and in one multinational organization when we were reviewing the policies. One of the policies of the Indian company inheritance was that you took time off for bereavement. So it was there. But now that the organization was taken over by a multinational, they said this is all hogwash. You just have time off. What you do in your time off is your problem. So there is no need to give bereavement. So the Indian organization actually, even in the policy, suggested that colleagues will actually visit home, but all of that was rubbished as, you know, no, workplace doesn't need any of that. So I was just reminded of that. And maybe we need to revisit some of the assumptions there.
We do, and I think the pandemic is also quite a paradigm shift in many ways. So hopefully, some of these things will be looked at one more time. So just moving on, grief. There are three aspects to it: how we experience it, how we express it, and then how we adapt to the loss, right? And and of course, how is it experienced? We've already talked about it. It's experienced psychologically through our feelings, thoughts, attitudes. It's experienced socially through our behavior with other people. And it is experienced physically through health and body functions. But here's an interesting diagram that makes a lot of sense to me. We often talk about the 5 stages of grief, and I think that's the world's most famous um, framework. And I think what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did for us in many ways was what Freud did for us, you know, opened up a conversation about a certain topic. She made it, she made it acceptable to talk about grief and death and dying and stuff. But the 5 stages, although they're the most well known, also sort of don't include a few other aspects which now more and more grief theorists are getting into. And one of these ideas which really resonated with me is the idea of intuitive versus instrumental styles, right? And I've mentioned this somewhere. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna have to turn that off. Just give me a moment. My apologies, I'm having some severe tech issues. But anyway, so what I was saying is that now this is one of the things that that has struck a chord with me, because it identifies that your style of grieving is not it's not you know, it's not one way or the other. So earlier there was some conversation about feminine styles versus masculine styles, and then somebody else came along and said, you know what, we're promoting gender stereotype if we do that, so let's call it intuitive and instrumental. And intuitive typically was traditionally associated with women, right, which is more energy invested in affect, emotion, feeling. They spontaneously express feelings, they share their inner experiences, they reach out to other people, whereas men are supposed to be coming more from the space of like cognitive, intellectual, problem solving, no crying, no showing affect, and discuss the problem rather than the feeling. But I don't think there's that clear demarcation. There are enough and more cases to prove the opposite. And I think if we look at it, both styles are absolutely acceptable in any gender. So this is what this theory sort of refers to, where it's intuitive and instrumental. And what I like most about this theory is that there's a Venn diagram and there's a centerpiece which talks about you can be blended, you can have both, right? Depending on where you are, who you're with, etc. But there is also, it recognizes the fact that it could be dissonant. And why does the dissonance come? It's because of what society expects of us.
Mm.
If a man is expected not to cry, but he wants to express his
Mm.
emotions, there is dissonance there. If a
Mm.
woman is, she says, you know what, no, I'm now the head of the family. I need to, suddenly I've lost, I need to scrape together the finances to put my children through school. So I don't have time to sit and weep about it. I'm going to start, so that's seen as a little bit more masculine way of going about doing things. So there's a bit of dissonance there as well. But I like the fact that it's a very generous model. There's room for everybody in it. And it doesn't dictate that you go through a particular stage at a particular time. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to put this out there. And also, I think one of the conceptual ideas we're going to touch upon today is the idea of anticipatory grief.
Yeah.
Right? Grief, typically we say we associate it with we've lost something and then we grieve its loss. But anticipatory grief really talks about the fact that we do feel grief knowing we're going to lose something, right? Or the idea that we might lose something uh, does cause us grief. And again, it's the idea, it's related to the awareness of impending loss. So here is where
There's an interesting question before you go further, Smriti, which
sure.
is from Nandini, which is that do you think there's a possibility of suppression when it comes to an intellectual and I think instrumental, I think, style of dealing with grief? Do you think the person is suppressing or maybe suppressing?
A lot of it possibly is the pressure on the person, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes it's not so much a matter of suppressing it to suppress the emotion completely. It's to maybe put it aside right now because there are so many important things to get in order.
Yeah.
And that's when delayed grief also comes. Delayed
Yeah.
grief is a recognized kind of grief where you're so caught up in the immediacy of, okay, you might have to go and attend to, uh, unfinished business. There's money matters, there are financial issues, there's bills to be paid, there's the reorder of a whole system that you were used to earlier. And at that point, there might be a bit of suppression, but it's also because a particular role has to be fulfilled. And which is fine. And later on, there is a delayed response to the grief. Sometimes it happens even years later. And then
Yeah.
the person can't make the connect. You wake up 2 years later and you can't get out of bed and you're really debilitated.
Really. Yeah.
It's delayed grief is experienced, yeah. So there might be an element of suppression. Also, it could be the fact that a little boy loses his father, and someone comes to him and says, "You're the man of the house now."
Yeah.
So it's also this internalizing of all the messages we
Yeah.
receive. What do you think?
From my personal experience, for example, I think in my case, like it would be hard for me to express, and I could fall in the category of an intellectual or an instrumental style of dealing with grief. It's a coping mechanism for me. It, you know, it, so long as I can do it with a sense of awareness, I think it's okay. I think doing it, the only element that I would add is that perhaps the suppression and the impact of suppression can be dealt with so long as there is a sense of awareness or a lack of awareness about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So circling back to the idea of anticipatory grief, um, we talk about the fact that we feel grief even in the case of impending loss.
Yes.
And there's also an element of fear that comes into it, right? You are afraid of losing something.
Yeah.
And that's another like often talked about idea that to know love is to know loss, right? And to because and to know fear of losing that. So
Yeah.
so anticipatory grief actually requires a lot of working through of fears.
Yeah.
Now, for
Before
example,
you go there, I was just reminded of the film Lunchbox, and I hope many people in the audience have seen that film. So there was this, supporting cast actor, which is the family, the neighboring family. So the protagonist speaks with her, neighbor from the kitchen window, and the neighbor is actually a caregiver. So she's looking after her husband who is bedridden. But they have these conversations from their kitchens. Okay. And the neighbor believes, so she's very upset one day because she believes till as long as the fan is running, her husband will be alive. And the fan had stopped working that day. And to me, that's such a symbol of anticipatory grief, or making some kind of an association that so long as this is going on, all is okay. And you know, there is almost like a sword that's dangling on the caregiver's head, that what if something were to happen? And that's perhaps the fear that you're going to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. So fear is a massive component in anticipatory grief, and this is something for us as healthcare providers also to think about. That there are so many losses being incurred on the journey of illness. It's not just the death. It's not just it's so many different losses that are being incurred. So being sensitive to that, and I this is something that I've often witnessed, that we will call somebody a difficult patient or a difficult caregiver when they come and they ask you questions or they're angry about something. And I oftentimes find that behind the anger is a fear. What is the fear, right? If you can get to that fear and address it, then the anger comes down. And that is an often experienced phenomenon. I think it's not easy. It's not easy to be compassionate towards someone when they're yelling at you up close in your face. But often in the illness related settings, there is a fear behind the anger, right? So just to very quickly recount, what are some of the fears? Fear of the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how this might play out. We don't know, or for the patient, it is what happens after I die. You know, what happens after the bereavement. Um, there's also the fear of loneliness, which is such a human thing. I mean, it's one of the most poignantly um, heartbreaking experiences. Fear of loss of family and friends. And let me tell you, this goes both ways. It's not just the caregiver, it's also the patient. I remember when my mother was sick, there was a point when she became, to me, very irrationally angry. Like she wouldn't even let me enter her room, or if I'd enter her room, she'd throw me out. And I'm talking about in hospitals, like I was thrown out of her room at 2 a.m. And slept on a chair in the hospital corridor. And I couldn't understand why this woman who loved me so much was behaving like this. And eventually we worked through it. And someone sat down with me and said, all of you are you're so worried about losing her. Imagine her. She's going to lose all of you. So it's to to put it in perspective. And that's when we actually addressed that conversation. It was not an easy one, obviously. And that is something to consider as well, that the loss is felt both ways. We don't know what happens after death, but for the person, it's really scary that all of these people who are in his or her life are not going to be around, or may not be around. Uh, Fear of loss of body function. This deeply ties into our fear of losing our dignity.
Yeah.
What happens if I lose bowel control?
Yeah.
What happens if I lose my ability to feed myself or to clean myself? And that is a big one, I think.
Yeah.
And not talked about a lot. We just expect that we'll put them in a diaper, we'll give them a bedpan.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah.
So loss of autonomy and dignity is associated very, very strongly with the loss of fear of body function. Sorry, Bhavana, you're saying something.
No, I'm saying that, I'm just agreeing with you. I was reminded of my father and his illness, and the fact that, there's a steady deterioration over a period of time. And for somebody who has led a very independent, and there are some ideas as well. And I'd like to bring that angle in, and the role that well-wishers can play. So, for example, we don't recognize that in our language, we will often say, I don't want to be a vegetable. I don't want to die like this.
Yeah.
You have no control on how much you will live and what your way of dying can be or cannot be. So, but because we hear this a lot, the anxiety and fear around it is that much more as well. That I wish to go in a sense, with a sense of, like there's an expression my grandmother used to say, मैं चलते फिरते जाना चाहती. you know, unfortunately, that was not her, the way that she had her last few days, but that was her deep desire because she just wanted to be independent and, you know, that was a better way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the reasons I think a conversation like the one we're having right now is so important is that it, you know, blows the cover on this, and we need to get comfortable talking about these things if we are able to uh, accompany that person on that journey, whether it's the caregiver or the family or the patient, right? And I think that's one of the things palliative care does beautifully, because we actually focus on these aspects and we say, okay, what's your story behind your physical pain?
Mm.
And once we know the story, then we know where to plug into that story. So I think that's really important. And so fear of loss of body function is associated with loss of autonomy, loss of
Mm.
dignity, and these are big words. we
Yeah.
we we bandy them about, but they're really big words and they mean different things to different people. And
It's upon my sense of identity, right? Like, my father-in-law is unwell these days, and you know, his big thing is like, I have always been this person. Now I'm not able to be that person. So, you know,
yeah,
it's painful.
and yeah, there you go, loss of identity. So loss of identity, who am I?
Yeah.
What makes me me? When I ask you to introduce yourself, how would you introduce yourself?
Mm.
As a caregiver, as a doctor, as a you know, as a civil society activist? Like, how would you introduce yourself? And when that is stripped away from you because of an illness, who's left?
Yeah.
Who's left then,
Mm.
right? So it's a big one. So now moving through anticipatory grief, and I'm going to just speed it up a little bit because I'm mindful of the time that we have. Bereavement itself is the actual event, right? So
Mm.
it's the actual event of loss. And again, I want to highlight the fact that it's not just associated with death. Changes in relationship, changes in economic status, as well as geographic relocation under pressure, uh, is also very much in the realm of bereavement. But we are used to using the word bereavement only in the context of death. Um, and now, Bhavna, I'm just going to dive right into what I think is something that a lot of people are talking about right now, and that is complicated grief. Um, Someone raised a question recently saying, what is complicated grief? You know, I mean, isn't grief grief? Why is it complicated? Why is complicated grief more difficult than usual grief? Does it mean that I love that person any more or any less? It's not that. Complicated grief is just intense and long lasting. It's grief that you cannot shake off.
Mm.
And normally, when we experience a loss, we have the intense, acute grieving period. And after a while, we do reintegrate. The
Mm.
grief is always there. It's not that it's gone, it's there, but it becomes more of a low thrum, you know. Sometimes it reemerges, sometimes it hits us like a wave. But for most part, we are functional, we're able to re engage, we're able to recalibrate our lives. In complicated grief, we're not able to do it.
Mm.
And so that's the difference. And like you can see on your screens, the natural healing process is derailed by certain things. It could be the nature of the relationship with the deceased person, right? Was it a relationship that was really conflicted? Was it a relationship that was the relationship in your life? Was it the one person you were entirely reliant on for your mental health? Was it
Mm.
somebody who abused you? You know, so there was no closure in that relationship. So there are various factors, circumstances of the death. Look at the pandemic we're experiencing right now.
Mm.
I suspect we're going to have a massive pandemic of complicated grief after this,
Yes.
because we are not getting closure. People are disappearing from our lives.
Yeah.
And this is again something that I came across recently. The most difficult kind of grief to comprehend is the grief over the disappeared. And people are testing positive, they're being whisked away into isolation units and then into ICUs, and that's it. We can't even be with them.
Yeah.
They're literally disappearing from our lives rapidly. And that does lead to complicated grief if you have not been able to
Yeah.
spend that much time with the person, say the things you needed to, give them one last hug or a kiss, or you know, all of that. We've had no time to
Yeah.
even catch our breath.
Yeah. And I think it is also sometimes difficult. to bring up this conversation, because you might be repeatedly told, listen, you've got to like chin up and bear it. And, it is what it is. This is the way, this, nothing can be done about it.
Yeah.
The fact that nothing can be done about it is as true as the sense of pain and loss and sadness that I feel. So there's a question around that as well, as to when somebody experiences bereavement, what can one do? How can one have a conversation with them? So what do I say if someone was bereaved recently? I'm here for you if you want to talk, or just give them a space, or should I just send a text? What can we do more?
So if that's all right with the person who asked the question, we can address it a little further down the line, because we've actually got a couple of slides dedicated to that. So I'll if I can weave it into that section, it'll help us just move, get through the next few slides. Events that occurred after the death. What kind of events that occur after a death can complicate the grief? A massive conflict in the family. Unfinished business in terms of property disputes. That person could have been your protector in the family, right? In some of the more conflicted families. It could be something as event related as the funeral going wrong, the body being manhandled, or you feeling that there was no dignity in the way the person's death was handled by the place where he or she died, right? So the indignity of the death, the fact that the person died alone in a place that you didn't expect them to die at, right? So all of these things can also trigger complicated grief. And chronic grief or complicated grief is now called prolonged grief disorder. I don't know if it was under consideration for being included in the ICD, but I'm going to have to check whether that's happened or not. And disenfranchised grief is a very, very poignant kind of grief. It's grief that is considered unacceptable by others. So this is one of those. These are people I would call invisible patients in the realm of grief and bereavement. And who are these people? Why would their relationship not be acceptable? One, because the relationship is not recognized because they didn't know you had a relationship. Maybe it was a relationship that wasn't in the public eye. And I'm not putting any value judgment on this, and I will ask you also to not. It could be several kinds of relationships, and you are not the person who has the right to mourn the death, right? It could be a real relationship, but the family or society does not approve, as it is non-traditional relationship. So how about families where somebody is from the LGBTQI community, and the family does not accept that, so therefore will not accept any of your relationships as legitimate, right? So what about those relationships? The way the person died is not supported, like a drug overdose or a suicide. In some cultures, suicide is considered a crime or a sin, right? And what happens also, I mean, a more sort of more, I think, dramatic or a bigger example would be what happens to people whose children have died because in a shootout that they instigated. We hear about these shootings in the US.
In US, yes.
Yeah, so what happens to the parent of that person who started the shooting, right? So that's disenfranchised grief as well. There is also disenfranchised grief when in healthcare providers, we are supposed to be stoic. We're not supposed to grieve. We're not supposed to cross that professional boundary, right? But, what if something about that patient or that family has really struck me, and my professional boundaries dictate that I cannot go and give them a hug or weep with them because I'm supposed to be the one to help them navigate their grief. So a lot of
you must be used to this. You have seen this so many times. So therefore, you can deal with one more.
Yeah. Or it's seen as a weakness, Bhavana.
Yes.
I mean, luckily for me, I'm in palliative care circles where it is acceptable to be human.
Yeah.
Right. But
Yeah,
you're in a lot of other very high tech, high specialty sections, you're not human.
you're
I'm
not
sorry, you're not human. You are doing a job and you have to do it with precision.
clinical.
Yes, clinical. So what happens to them? What about disenfranchised grief for them? And
Yeah,
then that's where the idea of suppression comes in.
yeah,
So someone raised that topic. That is unhealthy suppression also. I mean, unless you have an outlet and you're talking to somebody about the
right,
fact that you're feeling certain.
right.
All right. And also disenfranchised grief is experienced when the loss is not a person. For
Yeah.
example, a beloved pet. How
Mm,
many times have we told people to get over the loss of a beloved cat or a dog or a,
yeah,
anything? Isn't that grief as heavy to somebody whose possible only unconditional connection in life was with their pet,
yeah,
right? Unfulfilled dreams, a financial loss, a business loss, loss of health, a loss of loved one's function. These are not things that are usually recognized as something that you can grieve over,
yeah,
right? This all comes under the disenfranchised grief domain. And I'm just very quickly, Bhavana, going to touch on children, and then I'm going to try and wrap this up so we can just get into
yeah,
an interactive zone. The reason I brought this in is because a lot of people wonder if children experience grief or go through the experience of grief in the same way as an adult does. And some of the most common misconceptions are that children are too young to understand. They don't get it.
mm,
They must be protected from loss and pain. If we don't let them experience it, they won't feel it, and then that's it. They'll get over it. Yes. They don't feel grief as adults do. Children, they're very resilient.
yeah. They're very resilient. I've heard that so many times.
Or there's a thing that I won't say or do the right thing. The fear is in me, and this is one of the most common fears when it comes to children. I might upset them, right? So let's get rid of reminders. The child's parent has died or sibling has died. Let's just get everything out of. So then
Yeah.
this child is not going to remember anything.
Mm,
And if they're not, he's not crying. बाहर खेल रहा है बच्चा, तो why should we go and address the child is seemingly coping well? So
yeah.
these are all common misconceptions. But the reality of it really is that they understand a lot more than adults realize. They just process information differently. I'm going to come to that in just a bit. And we cannot protect a child from experiencing loss. They will experience loss. They need to learn to cope. Because if the loss goes unaddressed, that makes way for unhealthy coping patterns. Like, okay, the adults are not talking to me about it, so I better not talk about it as well. It's not okay for
Yeah.
me to even express my grief to anybody,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Feel it in their own ways,
It
which
conditions them, right? It conditions them by that act that this is not okay. You don't talk about these things.
yeah, and you prep them for more dysfunction later,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Um, there are no correct answers when you're talking to a child, only honest ones. Now, this is where the discomfort with us comes in, right? How do you get to be honest about death and dying and loss to a child? And how do you speak it in a simple language
Yeah.
that a child can comprehend?
Yeah.
Come to that in a bit. And to say that if I don't talk about it, I won't upset them. They are already upset. A child is upset that somebody they love has died. You are not planting an idea in that child's head by bringing his or her attention to it. By acknowledging that the child is upset, you are giving the child space to actually heal. You're seeing them. You're seeing them for the pain that they're going through.
Yeah.
And if you take away reminders, it tells the child that it is wrong to think of the deceased. Or,
Yeah.
let's just remove the photograph of the father. Let's just not talk about the grandmother anymore.
Yeah.
So the child is going to wonder if it's okay for him or her to ever talk about it.
Yeah.
And that opportunity for dialogue is then lost, right? And uh, the children may not know how to express their in a way that adults understand it, but they also might be delaying the grief to avoid upsetting other people.
Yeah.
Like, okay, my mother is really upset that my brother died, so I should not show my grief because she's already going through so much. Children also process stuff like that. And very quickly, we need to know that the way a child experiences grief depends a lot on the child's developmental concepts of death. And so for example, in early childhood, which is between 3 to 6 years, uh, they cannot think in abstract. So they don't understand the irreversibility of death. They don't understand the universality of death. And they have these, they might have this idea that only bad people die. You know, so there are all those kind of concepts that occur at early childhood. Around middle childhood, which is about 6 to 12 years, they might start understanding these concepts of irreversibility and stuff like that. But they also might believe that they might also start personifying death, like the boogeyman, you know, or they might think that it's a person who comes and takes them away, or things like that. Language is also in early childhood very literal. If you tell a child that grandmother's gone to sleep and has not woken up, they will take it literally. So yeah, so that kind of metaphor and analogy doesn't really work with a child that young, you know. And once they hit adolescence, or once they get past 12, 13 and stuff, then they start thinking more in terms of formal operational thought. They're able to make abstract sort of connections and things. So what I'm trying to say is, without sort of theorizing too much, is you need to speak the child's language in order to address the child's grief. And that takes a little bit of research and skill building. So if you have a child who you're worried about, try and look into what might be that child's developmental abilities at that time, and then try and fix your language to address the child. What children really need is information, and they need to be told, because just remember, a child is very, very imaginative. Okay, so if you leave gaps that they have to fill, they'll fill it with their imagination, which might be very far removed from the reality. So they need information which has to be given simply and clearly, and you might have to revisit several times. You know, so a child who is 6, who's on the cusp of, like, from early to middle childhood, will come back to you in a couple of years and ask you again. Be prepared to go back there with that child. And you need to allow the child to set the agenda. You don't sit a child down and say, you know, I'm going to tell you about what just happened. So the information you give has to be, the agenda has to be set by the child. And remember that children understand time very differently from adults. Today is now, tomorrow is just hours away, you know, like, so understand that the plasticity of time is very different for a child. So if you say 5 years from now, a very young child is not going to get what that means in the long run. You know, and if you tell a child time heals, certainly not going to understand what on earth you mean by that.
I don't like that phrase at all. What does the time heals mean is a conversation for a full new webinar.
Okay, the second thing that children really need is reassurance from loving adults around them. And, you know, a child might ask you a very seemingly cruel question like, okay, my sister is dead now, can I have her toys?
Yeah.
So you're thinking, why is this child asking this question? What a selfish question. It's not a selfish question as much as it is a, where do I fit now?
Yeah.
Am I now that my sister is not here, where do I fit in with you? Am I important? Especially for siblings of children who've been sick for a long time and who had the parents' full attention. This is a very, it's a very landscaping sort of question. Now, where do I fit in to your life? Practical questions like, who will take me to school? You know, all of those are basically for the child is trying to figure out who is going to fulfill certain roles that the deceased person used to earlier do. So is there going to be stability in my life in some sense? So try and see these questions as, that's what the child is trying to figure out, the new landscape, emotional landscape that he or she finds herself in. That's a very loud cricket in my office. I'm sorry if that's overpowering anything else. I live in the woods, so
we know you live in a beautiful jungle. So yeah, we will just let the audience know that.
So, and lastly, children need to express their feelings. They need to be given the space. And very often a child will express through behavior rather than words. If you find that a child after a bereavement has, there are more complaints coming from school, he's getting into fights, his grades are dropping, stuff like that, those are indicators. That could be an indicator of grief that is not being spoken about, but is coming out in behavior. And what they really need is, they need to have a space where they can safely express their opinions if they're having a mood swing or whatever else. And they
I
need
would
to,
be surprised with a very well-adjusted child as well.
yeah. Someone who's striving for perfection to take the place of the deceased person.
Yes.
We do that sometimes. We tell children, a child, the child who is, again, going back to the example of when a sibling is the one who has passed on, that child becomes the ideal child in the
Yeah.
family, forever and ever enshrined as the child, that the golden child that was lost. What it does to the sibling is either he spends the rest of his life trying to become that child, or trying to prove himself in other ways, or completely disengaged from the family.
Yeah.
So that's something to be sensitive to, yes. And physical exercise is very important for children, because children also release a lot of the emotions and through their energy and through play. And for very small children, you could use art to get them to express themselves. So they need to express their feelings. This is a whole other webinar also, Bhavna. So I'm just going to skip forward. And very quickly, before we go forward, before we end this, I want to make the distinction between grief and depression. Very often we say, oh, the person is depressed. Depression is a serious clinical condition. Grief is a normal response to loss. And we need to stop mixing up the two. And we need to understand.
Everyday language, right? I'm so depressed today.
Yeah. And it doesn't help people who are actually battling depression. And it really doesn't help people who are going through a natural process of grief. They have several common factors: intense sadness, fatigue, sleep and appetite disturbances, low energy, loss of pleasure, difficulty concentrating, overwhelming emotions. These are all there in acute experiences of grief. What sets them apart is that through grief, people still are able to stay connected to others, whereas depression, there is a loss of connection. There's a lot of withdrawing inwards and not wanting to engage with anybody, right? And so this is one of the sort of thumb rules, I would say, but of course bears a lot more study. Now, coming back to what someone had asked, how do you deal with a grieving person? I'm just going to ask, this poll, uh, how comfortable are you on a scale of 1 to 10 when talking to a person who's recently bereaved or grieving?
So we will just launch a poll. Will you please respond to that question that Smriti asked on a scale of 1 to 10, where how comfortable are you? 1 is least comfortable and 10 is most comfortable.
I don't see anything below 5, Bhavna, so far.
We are uncomfortable.
Yeah. It's not a comfort.
And it was one of the questions also, right? Which is like, how do I handle this? And it can go wrong even with the best skill and the best training. So it has gone wrong, for example, in my experience as well. And I think like I kind of figured out what to say in the case of a difficult situation. And I, with my best intentions, said it, but it fell, it offended the other person. And I'm so afraid of offending, as opposed to not doing anything at all. So a lot of people will make a choice of not saying anything at all. Let me give you space. But I'm just making assumptions on behalf of what the other person is needing, what to do. Yeah. Or, so what if I offended? I will still work with you through this. Have you got all the responses?
Yeah. So nothing below 4.
Yeah.
And so this is a very tricky territory for many people, including healthcare providers, including people who've been in the line of business for a long time or whatever. It never gets easy. And I have a moment of absolute, like my hands get sweaty and clammy for a few minutes before I have to talk to anybody who's grieving, even though I mean, it's been 19 years of doing it, but I still wonder, God, like you, Bhavna, am I going to say something offensive, or am I going to inadvertently hurt the person? So it's completely natural to be uncomfortable with this concept approaching a grieving person. But we're just going to try and see what some of the maybe some of the guardrails can be. It's important to remember that our behavior is more important than our words. So, in this new social media culture, when it's announced that someone has passed on, and I see this whole comment thread going RIP, 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 RIP. I read it as rip, like tear.
Yeah.
I don't even read it as rest in peace. And what does rest in peace really mean, and how much emotion does it convey? And what's my behavior? My behavior is more important. If I can just go and give someone a little squeeze on the shoulder, or if I have that kind of relationship with that person, or if I can show up with some sort of practical assistance, like I know they have young children at home and maybe they haven't had the time to cook or clean or whatever, maybe show up with something like that. So behavior is far more important than leaving an RIP.
Or Om Shanti these days.
Sorry?
Or Om Shanti these days. So there is a...
yeah. I mean, I actually search for an authentically phrased response.
Yes.
And it just, one look at a comment thread is all you need to know about how uncomfortable people are talking about a grief, right?
You will find the same things, like you must be strong and remember this person will always be with you. They are looking down upon you from above. They will always be there, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Which may work for some people and may not. So I think
the other one is thoughts and prayers.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Thoughts and prayers. Yeah. Okay. So my pet peeves, and I see I share them with you. Be aware of your own feelings and how you deal with death, right? If you are uncomfortable with it, if it brings up a lot of trauma or triggers a lot of uncomfortable emotions in you, then rushing in to talk to the grieving person at that time may not be the best thing to do. You need to sort of get a handle on where you are at. With the experience, maybe reach out to some people yourself, and then extend your condolences to the person who is grieving in a way that is appropriate to you and to them. Listening is the most important skill. Sometimes we, like Bhavana said, we go in and we say, be strong, it's fine, this time heals, of course, our favorite catchphrase. But let's listen to the person instead, and say, okay, I know this is a difficult time for you, and I know a lot of people might be reaching out to you, but I'm here for you to speak to whenever you think you need to. So, like offer the opportunity for them to reach out to you. Let them know that you're open to listening to them, rather than going in and trying to tell them how to go through the grieving process. Don't overprotect or hurry people through the process of grief. We do this also a lot. And help people find their own solutions to problems. Don't give them your solutions. When I lost my mother, you know what helped me? No, she's not lost my mother. She's lost her mother, right? Yeah. So don't compare stories. And I'm going to come to that in a second. At an appropriate moment, maybe share a happy or a moving experience you had with the person who has passed on. That is such a beautiful way to honor them, and to also remind the person of the fact that this person has touched many lives, and that you are not afraid to mention this person's name.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's the most important, to me, this is the most beautiful way of honoring the person who's left behind as well.
Yeah. Like saying, I remember when I met your XYZ one time, I was going through a difficult time. He said something that really helped me. Or I met him here, and your father, so typical of the way he joked. He told me this joke, which I found so funny. And I think about it and laugh. So stuff like that. It doesn't have to be something deeply meaningful. It could just be just a happy memory that you had with that person. And don't tell them what they should or shouldn't be feeling. I mean, this is pretty much just repeating the previous thing. Don't compare their grief to experience of others or yourself. I know, let's say at least your mother was sick only for 2 months. See that poor Mrs. Sharma, whose mother has had Alzheimer's for the last 6 years.
Good point.
don't ever compare somebody's story to somebody else, and be clear about what you can offer and follow through.
Yeah.
If you offer your phone number for them to call, then be available for that phone call.
Yeah.
Or if you say, you know what, I'm going to take your kids shopping day after tomorrow so that maybe you get some space for yourself, do it. But make sure it's something that you can do.
Yeah.
Be aware that cultural differences will influence how people grieve. The person in front of you may not grieve the way you do. So
Yeah.
be aware of that. And learn to recognize, and this is mostly for healthcare providers, learn to recognize grieving difficulties and do refer to professional help from counselors and therapists. Right? So there's the point beyond which it's complicated or it's really, really difficult. Uh, maybe signpost to people who can professionally offer help. And I'm just going to close with this. I've always loved this quote, which is grief I've learned is really just love. It's all the love you want to give but cannot. All of that unspent love gathers up in the corners of your eyes, the lump in your throat, and in that hollow part of your chest. But having said this, having posted this, I also want to say that there are other kinds of grief that are not so full of love.
Yeah.
There are conflicted emotions people sometimes feel. So maybe at some other time we can share that. So yes, so that's the end of the presentation, Bhavna, and I know we have just a few more minutes. So
Yes. So we did address some of the questions along the way, and I do think that there were some that came, and we'd like to take some. And this is the time when this is a request for the audience. If you want to put in your questions or you want to raise your hand, you can do that. And in the meanwhile, Smriti and I will go through some of the questions that were not addressed. The one being, so there was this question about how do I talk to a 5-year-old who has lost a grandparent and is now insecure about losing a parent.
So this is the reassurance bit, right? Yeah. So typically a child will say, are you also going to die now?
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty, yeah. So what that child really needs is reassurance to say, you know, I'm right now I'm healthy. I don't have the illness that, or whatever the grandparent had. And so I'm here with you right now and I'm healthy. And for the foreseeable future, you know, I'm not going anywhere.
Yes, and I think in this reminder, one of the things that you said, which is recognize what they are actually saying, that I'm fearful. I see the fact that you're afraid of losing one more person that you love. And I hear that is very important. Um, you gave some brilliant guidelines and tips, but I would also want to add to people, it is not necessary that you will be able to practice all of them. So ask for professional help. It is fine.
And take into consideration, Anisha, that the child is around 5 years old, it's important to remember the language the child will understand. So like I said, avoid metaphors and analogies. Keep it very concrete ideas. I am here now with you. You know, like mama is fit. And and also find out what he's afraid of. They might say that someone might have told this child also in completely well-intentioned ways that the grandfather, grandmother has passed away. Um, and he might have heard a story around that, which for a 5-year-old has triggered the imagination. So try and find out what exactly about his grandparents' death has stayed with him or her, and then maybe try and address that. 9 out of 10 times I find that adults will go and say something extreme, like huge, very abstract analogies, and that has actually caused the child a little bit of damage. So to address it, to elicit as soon as possible, yes. And like Bhavana said, provide that reassurance and name the feeling. I can see that you're scared. It's okay. There's no reason to be because.
So there's another question, which is that how do you engage with the disenfranchised griever in the context of LGBTQI? And if the person does not communicate much, but wishes to be understood?
Ooh, lots to unpack there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I have a straightforward, easy answer to that question, to be honest, because
Let's work through this. I have a couple of suggestions, and maybe you can tell me whether I'm on the right track or not.
yeah,
I do think that there can be a long period of delayed grief, right? So maybe the person is just wanting you to check in with them for a while, and they don't expect to say anything. But you, as a well wisher, continuously simply check in until there can be communication. What about that?
absolutely. And disenfranchised also see the community that they're surrounded by, right?
Mm.
What is the ecosystem of that person? If
Yeah.
they're grieving, they might want to also reach out to people within their own community of people who they closely, because see, uh, quite often we feel that someone else is not going to understand my grief,
Yeah.
at least somebody who's not from the same, social context that I'm in, right? So one is to persist. You don't have to force your, like, it's not necessary that um, you have to go about it in a particular way, but like Bhavana said, make your presence known, that
Mm.
that person want to talk about. One is to recognize, I see that you're grieving. I understand that you're grieving. You have suffered a huge loss.
Mm.
Um, if you feel like you're comfortable to talk to me about it, I'm here for you. It's a simple invitation. You open the door and leave it open, right? And then it's up to them to meet you when they're ready.
And I like that community point that you made. Maybe nudge them to a support group. Maybe nudge them to, other people like them that they can possibly have a conversation with, where they will feel a little more understood. And you can't provide that support. Despite your best intentions, maybe you are not in that position to provide that support.
We need to know our boundaries as much as we need to know our own fears. We
Yes.
need to know what we're uncomfortable or comfortable talking about. We need to know what our own boundaries are in terms of our fears and our abilities to provide support. And we certainly need to know that where we are skilled and maybe need to still build some skill.
Yeah.
Because I mean, what is that phrase? The path to wherever is paved with good intentions, right? So,
Yeah.
but we need to know our own
Hard to
boundaries.
tell.
Yeah, I was trying to say that, but
You're trying not to say that. Oops. Okay. But we are in a tea conversation where we are going to normalize everything. So,
yeah.
in that, under that aegis, there are a couple of questions which I think will make for another webinar. So, there is a question about stages of grief, and we've recently heard that there's a sixth stage of finding meaning. I would like to let you know, I read that question a little while ago. I think it was Avni. And I would like to let you know that maybe we can pick that up in another conversation, because it's a whole new subject. So, yeah, I think the sixth stage of finding meaning and reintegrating with life, having gone through grief, is is a beautiful concept. Would love to talk about it. Do you want to
Yeah.
say something, Smriti?
Actually, I had read very little bit about it. So I thought, as the topic is about grief, like if I can have little more knowledge about it, how we can integrate in our life. Because as a counselor in palliative care, bereavement is very very important. What I feel, because vacuum is left in the caregiver's life. Uh, so I thought that this particular stage will definitely help. Finding meaning itself is, there are so many branches which I could think of.
Yeah,
That's why I wanted to know. Thank you for addressing it.
yeah,
Lovely. Nandini has also brought up something about narrative.
yeah,
Uh, bringing in narrative. It wasn't narrative medicine. Sorry, it was bringing in narrative therapy in case of anticipatory grief. I think narrative therapy is actually an incredible way to also link up to finding meaning.
yeah,
So narrative therapy is basically eliciting the person's story. And that is something that I feel very strongly about. Bhavna does. There's a whole bunch of us who find that storytelling in how do you bring humanities into healthcare? It is through storytelling.
yeah,
And how do you get to know how you can help someone? hear their story, listen to it. And so narrative therapy is really the seed of that. And I think narrative therapy would go a long way in the reintegration part that Avni just brought up. So like Bhavana said, that's a whole new subject. It's a beautiful subject. I'd love to dive into it later with Bhavana at some point. But I think we're out of time now, Bhavana.
Yes, I think we're out of time. And as anticipated, this was a conversation. But I'd like to leave the audience with the reassurance that we have noted, and we will probably cover that. We will not probably, we will cover that topic of stages of grief, especially finding meaning and reintegrating, and looking at therapies like narrative therapy. Um, I'd like for you to leave us suggestions on what would you like us to cover in subsequent webinars. And while you do that, I would like to take the time to acknowledge Smriti for her beautiful way of covering this immense and wide and complicated and large topic in, to summarize it and make it contextual for caregivers is something that we really appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we hope that, this is the beginning of many tea conversations over difficult topics like grief, death, dying. Any closing remarks, Smriti?
I just want to thank you so much, Bhavna, for doing this week after week and for seeing the value in opening up these conversations. And also, I just want to thank every single person who sat through this and through all the other webinars, because I have spent a lifetime hearing from people, oh, here comes the doom and gloom.
Yeah.
But or the fact that, are you going to be talking about death and dying again? So, but for me, I really feel that it's only when we have these conversations about grief and death and dying and things like that, that we're able to really appreciate our lives more, and I think the more conversations that happen like this, it's there's only that much more growth that can come from it. We're all going to die, it's inevitable, but we have the choice to die better than we would, right? And to live much better than we would. So thank you really very much for this. And Bhavna, perfect timing. My battery, I've just got a big sign from my laptop saying your battery's dying. So well timed. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you, everyone in the audience. We recognize some of you, and thank you for making the time and persisting with us through this have been a difficult topic to go through with. We will now launch feedback. So rate the session for us and give us feedback in the comment section. And, let us know and join us for the next. So there are many more coming, and we hope to engage in a conversation every time you ask a question. It empowers us and enables us as much as I think it creates a space for a conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.